Public servants and their contempt for the little guy. That is the topic of tonight's byline. When you're following a big story, where the people that know what happened don't want to talk, you look for the small things, but the telling things that direct you to clues. And that's what we've been doing since the flooding in High River and the kicking down of doors and seizure of guns by RCMP officers there. The big questions have always been, why did this happen? Who gave the order? I mean, this didn't happen anywhere else, and there are lots of guns across the rest of Alberta. There were plenty of other communities flooded. Well, today, another piece of the puzzle falls into place, and it has to do with certain police officers in positions of power having contempt for ordinary people. Sergeant Brian Topham was one of the faces of the RCMP during those tense days in late June. High River was one of the hardest hit areas in the province as Calgarians were cleaning up their basements and draining water that had once sat 15 rows up inside the Saddle Dome. The people of High River were being forcibly kept out of their homes, out of their town, by the police and the military. The town was surrounded by officers, cruisers, even tire strips, blocking residents from even getting near their homes. And then the word spread that guns had been seized. And Sergeant Brian Topham spoke to the media, giving the rationale. We just want to make sure that all those things are in a spot that we control simply because of what they are, Sergeant Topham said. Well, because of what they are. What they are is firearms. They're tools owned quite literally by millions of law-abiding Canadians and used every day without incident. But Topham explained that they were seized because the Mounties wanted to control them. And I think you can tell that he thinks guns are dangerous in the hands of the little people. Now the new piece to the puzzle, the part that shows a pattern of contempt. It seems that Topham is the kind of guy that you might not exactly want in a leadership position. Not only does he have contempt for ordinary law-abiding Canadians and their ability to handle firearms, he also has contempt for a bunch of other ordinary Canadians. Women, natives, Newfoundlanders. What did Topham do or say? Well, apparently he made plenty of comments, enough that he was suspended and docked pay. According to an agreed-upon set of facts, between 2002 and 2004, Topham made insensitive and degrading comments about women in the presence of a female civilian employee. Oh, gosh darn it, you might say he made insensitive comments. You might think this is PC BS that doesn't mean much. But need I remind everyone that he was actually reprimanded for events that happened during the time when the RCMP is accused of ignoring hardcore sexual harassment and sweeping it under the rug. I don't think this would have happened unless there was something real to it. So what exactly was Topham saying? Well, apparently he'd tell female employees that, quote, 1974 was the worst year in the RCMP history because that's when the RCMP let women in the force. Really? In 2002, 2004, he's still complaining about women being allowed in? If this was, say, 1976 and he's still a little bitter, I could understand. But he's still bitter about women in the police force 30 years later? Topham has contempt for women. He has contempt for ordinary people. This is a man with a superiority complex. Here's what he also said, according to documents obtained by QMI agency. He, quote, made stereotypical comments about Aboriginals and people from Newfoundland made in the presence of officers who had those backgrounds. He doesn't like women, he doesn't like certain ethnic groups, doesn't like certain regions of the country, doesn't like ordinary people with guns. Now, given Topham's view in his history, why was this man sent to High River and put in a position of power, of authority, to be the face of the RCMP? This is the type of guy who forgets that being a public servant means that you serve the public. The public does not serve you. His contempt for everyone he disagrees with is so telling of his mindset. This is the type of mindset we need to keep pushing back against, that we need to be aware of. Finding out that Sergeant Brian Topham's past includes weird comments doesn't tell us everything we need to know about what happened in High River. But it does give us some strong clues about the attitude that was driving the Mounties back in June. And that's the byline.
And I'm very disappointed still, as I said 2 weeks ago, to see people trying to make hay out of this when the RCMP were doing their job.
Premier Alison Redford, again, that was last month, defending the kicking down of doors. Here to join us for further discussion on this is a former police investigator himself, a man who knows what beat cops face, Ross McLean. Ross, to me, one of these things in isolation no big deal. All of these things together to me starts, as I said, showing a pattern. Is this one that we should be worried about?
I think absolutely it's one that you should be worried about, Brian, and Canadians should be worried about it. I think you hit it on the head when you talked about leadership. You know, if you're going to be acting as the spokesperson for the RCMP, informing the public during times of emergencies for what the police are doing and why they're doing it, you better be accurate, you better know all the details, and you better be forthcoming.
And I want to point out quickly, for someone that thinks sergeant is a low-level position in the RCMP, it's not, especially in detachments like High River. The sergeant could be the guy in charge of that detachment. I know you were with Toronto Police, not RCMP, but it's not a low-level guy.
No, sergeants aren't a low-level guy, especially in situations like you talk about where it could be a smaller detachment. He could, in fact, be the top dog for running the place. But regardless, he's a sergeant. He sets the tone. He's a supervisor. He'll be running the station at certain times. He'll be running platoons. He'll be giving orders. And he'll also be on scene communicating what people are doing and why they're doing it. And the most important thing to follow, I think, as a police officer, is the rule of law. And what we've seen with the High River is we haven't exactly heard the explanation as to why charter rights were violated. Nobody seems to want to own that.
And charter rights were definitely violated. Search and seizure without warrant, unreasonable search and seizure, these are all problems. And I want to bring something up. You pointed this out to me. Sergeant Topham had been involved in cases where there were claims of charter infringements for his conduct. Explain what was going on. This was a case of him stopping and frisking people and discovering drugs. Explain that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things people need to understand. That when it comes to searches and searches without warrants, the Supreme Court has said from the start and will until the end, saying they don't like searches without warrants. You should, in all cases, get a warrant if you possibly can, humanly can, do that first. Sergeant Topham, if it's the same Sergeant Topham,
yeah, well, it is, yeah,
that's named in this case, he was considered an expert for doing traffic stops along what's called a highway where criminals run a lot. It's a pipeline. And he had stopped hundreds of motorists and found reasons through questioning and looking at them to find ways to be able to search their cars to find if there were drugs or not. And in one case that went up to the appeal courts, a dissenting judge found great difficulty with his actions for justifying how the searches were done. Now, a couple of judges said, no, we agree with it, but one laid out a very strong case for saying
I want to read a quote from Justice Ronald Berger at the Court of Appeal, and I should say there's dissenting, but I think it fits with the pattern that we're establishing elsewhere. And Justice Berger said, in my opinion, the charter infringing conduct in this case supports the conclusion that Sergeant Topham displayed an unreasonable ignorance and disregard of his charter obligations to the appellant. So, I mean, what do you do in a situation like this? The Public Complaints Commission is going on. I'm encouraging people to get involved. We know that the anti-gun groups like Wendy Kukier, they're getting involved and trying to say everyone should be charged. They want everyone that had their firearms seized in High River charged for what happened. I want this kind of behavior, this disregard for people's ability to keep their own private property without being subjected to unreasonable search and seizure. I want that to stop. Can you push back, or will the RCMP simply circle the wagons here?
Well, we have this disconnect when it comes to our charter rights. And I'm not sure where it comes from. I knew that as a police officer, every time I exercised a power, I had to be prepared to justify it, whether it was arrest or use of force. So if I'm going to violate your charter rights, which you have, they're a given, same as you're presumed innocent, the Crown, the police, they have to justify why they entered a house and why they took something. Now, when I say justify, Brian, this sergeant, the RCMP know the law very well on entering a home. They know very well the case law about whether something is in plain sight or not. They know it. There's not any real question here, but they don't seem to be coming out and owning it and proving it. So I think we need to have some real sanctions when it comes to charter rights violations, that we don't go and have to prove that they were taken away from us. They have to prove why they did them.
All right. Ross, great talking to you as always. We'll chat again soon. Email me your thoughts on all of this. byline@sunmedia.ca. Another piece of the puzzle when it comes to High River. Are you taking part in the public complaints yet? Have you filed your complaint? Let me know. Byline@sunmedia.ca. Stick around. We've got more to come.